everyone. My name is Meg Goeke, and I would like to talk to you about my favorite author. Everyone wants to be the hero of their own story. For some, seeing oneself in that role is very easy. There are any number of role models on TV, in books and movies, as well as in real life. For the rest of us, however, that can be a bit more difficult. Finding the kind of heroes to whom that we can relate, the kind who show us who we can be an onerous task filled with disappointment. Growing up, my most favorite thing in the world was reading. But I had a very hard time finding books in which I could see myself. But then when I was in middle school, I came across a book series called The Circle of Magic. And during middle school, I was going through the worst bullying of my life. But this book series by Tamara Pierce opened up an entire world of possibility for me. Reading Tamara's books saved me and showed me exactly how important it is to see oneself in fiction. Growing up, Tamara was born the oldest of 3 children in rural Pennsylvania on December 13th, 1954. She grew up very poor, but the whole town she grew up in was also poor, so she didn't really know actually how poor she was. From a very young age, like myself, she also loved books, and she talks about how her uncle bought her her very first set of books, and it was the Winnie the Pooh series by A.A. Milne, and that she read the books until they fell apart, and that to this day, books are still the yardstick by which she measures true wealth. She began writing when she was a child, when her father suggested that she should start writing down the stories that she would tell herself out loud. And she continued to write. She wrote all the time. But when she was a sophomore in high school, she came up against a case of writer's block that would last until she was a junior in college. She said that she was able to write essays, journal articles, newspaper articles, but she couldn't write anything original. She couldn't write anything that was her own. And so she gave up on being a writer. She decided she would major in psychology instead. She would never get her psychology degree because she was terrible at math and never could pass statistics. So she ended up graduating with just a basic liberal arts degree. But in her junior year of college, she, through blood, sweat, and tears, was able to write her first original story since she was a sophomore in high school. So, almost a decade later was she actually able to break through that writer's block. And around the same time, she moved back in with her mother in Idaho, where she took what she describes as the first and only job for which her degree actually qualified her. She worked as basically a den mother in a group home for teenage girls. And in that group home, she would tell these girls the story that would end up being her first book, called The Song of the Lioness. The 732-page manuscript, originally intended to be an adult novel, got sent out to hundreds of different publishers, all of whom rejected it, until finally, one woman who would become her agent, her name is Claire Smith, suggested that she break it up into 4 books and rewrite it for teenagers. So the fact that she had already told this story to a bunch of teenagers in a group home ended up working out for her. And after a few years of rewrites, the first book, Alana, The First Adventure, was published in 1983. For a few years after that, she continued dabbling in different genres, trying to write different stories, none of which got accepted. When finally, 10 years later, she decided to, or in the late 80s, I should say, she decided to revisit the world of Alana. And her new set of stories would be set 10 years later in the same world, using both new and old characters. And she said that while Alana was based on her sister, this new character would be more like her, as she describes a semi-recluse who is better at dealing with animals than with people. Throughout the 90s, her books grew in popularity until she finally reached a point where she could quit her day job. And at this point, she has published upwards of 30 novels and collections of short stories and travels around the world on book tours and visiting sci-fi fantasy conventions. Now, the settings and the world and the characters in her books have very much influenced how I see the world around me. both of her major series are set in fictional worlds. The Tortall universe, which is where the Alana books take place, and the Emmeline universe, which is where the Circle of Magic series takes place. And each world contains various cultures and countries that all draw parallels to our own world. In Tortall, you have the Yamani Islands, which draw from East Asia, the Empire of Carthage, which is Middle Eastern, the Copper Isles, which take from various Southeast Asian cultures like Indonesia. And in the Emmeline universe, you have Namorn, which is very Scandinavian, and Therios, which is based on ancient Greece and Japanese feudalism and Shintoism. And her characters, she writes mostly female heroes. She does have a couple of male protagonists and more planned for the future, but her characters are primarily women and girls. And each one follows a very different path, usually at odds with their background. In the Alana series, Alana dresses up as a boy in order to become a knight. And in later books, her daughter becomes the head spy of a foreign country. In the Circle of Magic books, Daja, who comes from a culture of traders that shuns craft making, ends up becoming a smith. She ends up using her magic to work with metal. And she's also Tamara's also very mindful of the diversity of her characters, and this is really what helped me be able to see myself in her books. She includes characters from very many races, ethnicities, backgrounds, and religions, and she also has made a concerted effort to represent various sexualities as well. In one article about her work, Casey Kasselnick said, "Where pseudo-medieval fantasy universes are usually European ones, Pierce never lets readers settle into such a monocultural convention. You know, most fantasy books out there are very white and very straight. Tamara's books are not. For example, Daja from the Circle of Magic series is a lesbian, and two of her mentors are in a lifelong relationship. And I was reading the book in which Daja discovered her sexuality when I was discovering my own. Tamara let me know that that's okay. Her books let me see myself. Like, as I mentioned previously, I was bullied a lot growing up, particularly middle school. I was awkward, I was nerdy, and I would generally rather read than talk to people. But seeing people like me in her books helped me survive that time, and it let me know that even if I didn't have friends in the real world, I could find them in her books. And again, being able to watch one of my favorite characters discover her sexuality about the same time I was discovering my own really gave me a place where I knew it was okay. I never had to question whether it was right or wrong, and I never had to question whether or not I would be accepted. Because her books really taught me that acceptance is a verb, that it's an action, that it's not passive, and that one's chosen family are those people who actively work to accept you every day, and that you have to do the same for them. Her books taught me the value of paying it forward. Of all the mentors that I've had in my life, I try very hard to do the same for those who come after me, particularly in the LGBT community. I try to mentor and take under my wing younger versions of myself and make sure that they have the kind of role models that I was lucky enough to have. Her books have also showed me that everyone has a path and everyone has a place. It's just a matter of finding it. That, just because your life isn't taking the path that you think it's supposed to, just because you aren't where you thought you would end up, doesn't mean that it's the wrong place. It doesn't mean that it's the wrong path. And that often the journey is the best way of discovering who you are. And while there have been many influences throughout my life that have contributed to who I am today, Tamora Pierce and her books have been a constant presence, reassuring me and comforting me when I needed it, and motivating me and forcing me to look hard at myself when necessary. While I don't expect everybody here to immediately run out and buy her books, I do believe that everyone needs someone like Tamora Pierce in their life, someone whose work makes you better and shows you everything you can be.